Newsflash, everyone, not every woman wants to be a mom. I feel like I'm hearing a collective gasp somewhere, but it's true. And we talked to three women who are child free, living very fulfilling lives. We also talk about chosen family, or what I call friend family. These are those enduring relationships that can sometimes outlive marriages, partnerships, when the kids leave the nest. These relationships often transcend the term friendship. They're family. It's chosen family. This conversation celebrates designing one's own life outside of social norms and really, really enjoying it. Enjoy child free. Hi, welcome to Doing This Differently, a podcast that celebrates non-traditional family structures. I'm your host, Nicole Foley, a solo mom living in San Francisco with my daughter, Dylan. In each episode, we talk to families who are forging their own unique paths, and together we expand our definition of what family looks like. From a young age, I signed on to the idea that getting married and having children was not only the most normal path for a woman, but the most fulfilling one possible. And most cultures reinforce this idea, particularly to young women, often reminding them of their small window to have children. And as you get older, you might even hear, you better find someone quick. It's almost as if it sounds like it doesn't matter who. That kind of thinking and pressure can often lead to less than ideal choices and outcomes. And I've seen it. I've definitely seen it. So over the last few years, I've talked to more and more women who are not having children for a variety of reasons. Some know from a young age that motherhood is not for them. Others may have thought that they were going to have that traditional nuclear family, and either it didn't happen for one reason or another, or they realized that children were no longer part of their life vision. Simply put, not every woman wants to be a mom. For a long time, financial security was one of the main reasons marriage was the North Star for many women. Nowadays, women are more financially independent, and many have found great reward from pursuing interests, travel, and career. Also, there's such a thing as chosen family, or what I call friend family. And that offers a support system that can be as robust or even more robust than the traditional nuclear structure. Today, we're talking to three child-free women, and we'll hear about the factors that led them to a child-free path, how each is challenging the idea that women need children in order to experience deep love and fulfillment, and how they've developed their own chosen families. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guests. Mashadi Matabani is free, Black, and 47. She lives in the mighty American South, where she is a Black feminist educator and an independent scholar with a PhD in American Studies. Caroline Wallace is a graphic designer and aspiring photographer who splits her time in San Francisco and Mendocino with her dog, Prince. And I'll just say that Caroline is a friend of mine, so I would edit this to say that she's an incredible photographer, not an aspiring one. And Iman Abdul Fattah is a native New Yorker, an art and architectural historian specializing in medieval Egypt and the Eastern Mediterranean. In addition to her research and scholarship, she's an avid traveler, hiker, and yogi. Mashadi, Caroline, and Iman, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories with us. There's so much to cover. Let's get into it. So, can each of you describe the environment you grew up in and what you envisioned your future to look like as it relates to family?
I am the proud progeny of an Egyptian mother and African American father. So I was raised both bilingual and bicultural. And I would say that both of my parents were very present and active in my life, and heavily invested in my education, both formal and informal.
And in terms of what you envisioned for your future in terms of family, what did that look like?
I would say by default, it was expected that I would have a family, meaning that I would have a life partner, children, no pets. This was not something that was necessarily spoken, but it was expected or assumed in sort of a nonverbal sense.
And did you feel that more from your mom's side, dad's side, or was it equal?
I would say both, but in different ways. My father was a single child, so I think he felt sort of deprived in that way, not having siblings to speak of. And my mother's one of eight children, and so it's expected that you're going to reproduce and procreate and carry on, this legacy. So I would say that it was expected differently from each of my parents.
Caroline, what about you?
Yeah, so I grew up in Michigan in the Midwest, and I'm one of two children. And I think it was similar to what Iman said, very kind of expected that just the thing that you do is that you get married. Well, at this point, also you go to school in our generation, get married and have kids. And all of my high school friends did that. I didn't have really any examples of women who didn't choose to have kids. I grew up around families. Well, it wasn't even an expectation, it was just the norm, was that that's what you did. And there was no questioning of it. It wasn't really until I moved to San Francisco and I saw other examples of different types of relationships, partners who were not married, people not having children, that I, for the first time, was able to see that there were other options.
And what did you see for yourself?
I think I just assumed that that would be my path because I didn't question it. It wasn't until I was later in my life, around 30, that I realized I actually had a choice. Up until that point, I just assumed that I would go down the path of going to school, getting married, and having children.
I think that's super common. Mishadi, what about you?
Just like everybody else, garden variety, regular middle class, two-parent household, with highly educated parents with incredible expectations for academics and career. Nobody had to say anything to me about my future. In that, as everyone, as you know, Iman and Caroline both have said, it sort of was the unsaid expectation. And my father is from South Africa, and my mother is African American. Actually, my father's side probably is the side that would be way more explicitly women need to do this and have that. But because he was in exile, I didn't grow up around them. But nonetheless, it still was unsaid, right? I knew that this is just what people do. As Caroline said, you go to school, get a job, get married, and have kids in that order.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like we all had similar experiences in that regard for sure. And I remember having a conversation with a friend a few years ago that was like, there's so many myths. There's so many myths around, marriage and kids. And what's interesting is from the outside, I was thinking this woman was exemplifying exactly, kind of what this path looks like. And it was just interesting to hear her. She's like, you know, any which path you take, that's the right path. And I always appreciated that. Describe the moment or moments when you realized that raising children was not going to be part of your life, and tell us a little bit about what led to that realization or decision.
Well, as I mentioned, I think I just always assumed that that would be my path. And my grandmother had my mother at 29 years old, and my mother had me at 29 years old. And I think there's this thing that happens that I see, is that kind of subconsciously or unconsciously, we just sort of follow what we know, what we were raised in. And so in my mind, I was like, well, wouldn't that be wonderful? But at 29, I still hadn't met anyone. I was living in San Francisco. I was approaching my 30th birthday, and that time had passed. And I remember exactly where I was. I was standing on the deck at my cousin's house, and all of a sudden, I realized I had a choice. Like, I was contemplating it a little bit, and I was like, oh, I don't have to have kids. And it probably seems like very, like a kind of a mundane thought, but I still remember it. It was so powerful to realize that either way it would be okay, and that I wasn't beholden to this thing that, was expected of me. And then I was just open. So in my mind, I was like, well, if it happens, great. And if it doesn't happen, that's fine. And it really depended for me on if I was going to meet someone. I ended up never really meeting anyone that I wanted to have a baby with. So it sort of for me was circumstantial, but I would say that my mindset around it was one of openness, that I was kind of okay either way. And then I think the clincher was, and I feel embarrassed, a little embarrassed saying this, but I ended up getting a puppy while I was traveling in Peru. And I went through 6 months of puppyhood and not sleeping and having all eyes on this puppy for 6 months, and, trips to the vets, emergency calls. I mean, like, it was a lot. And after that, like 6 months, I was like, I'm good. Like, I don't think I could do this with a human child. So I think that for me was kind of the clincher. I realized that I really cherished my sleep and my time and my energy, and I was getting older. So that was 11 years ago. So I was 37 at the time that I think I finally was like, okay.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Anytime I've talked to like child free couples or people who have dogs, and they're like, well, it's nothing like having a baby. I'm like, it's not. I mean, everything that I hear. Now, granted, dogs don't go to college or expensive preschools, but everything that you just said, I mean, yeah, yeah. And I didn't even realize until I talked to friends who were they just got a puppy and they're training the puppy. I'm like, that looks like a lot of work. So anyway, I can't say that they're apples to apples because I've never had a puppy, but I would venture to guess that they're more similar than they are different.
I thought about this a lot, and recently in particular, and I would say I was in my late teens, around, the time when I was entering college, that I articulated to myself that motherhood wasn't for me. And I don't think there was a particular moment. There were probably a series of moments, or this was a period when I considered this. My mother was the primary breadwinner at the time, and there was a lot of financial stress. And I saw, prior to that, I had seen how both my parents made tremendous sacrifices so that my siblings and I could live this safe, comfortable, and productive life. And suddenly, my mother was a primary breadwinner, and nothing was expected to change. I was still going to NYU. We were still living the same lifestyle. But I think, my mother was silently under a lot of pressure to perform. And I would say part of that pressure was placed by my father, and I realized I don't want to make those kinds of sacrifices for anyone but myself. Um, I realized that if I were ever to live paycheck to paycheck, which fortunately I could say I have never wanted for money, I have never chased a dollar, and not that there should be any shame in either of those things. But my mother also taught me, whether you have a family or not, you have to have your own income, you have to have your own money. And it was going through those experiences while I was transitioning to college that I realized I don't want to endure what both my parents, but what especially my mother had to endure to keep five people together on her own.
Side note, I had a conversation with a man a couple of months ago when I was in Brooklyn about this topic, being child free, choosing to be child free. And she was mentioning that oftentimes when somebody hears that someone is choosing to be child free, they make some assumptions, maybe that it was childhood trauma that influenced that decision, or this person came from a broken home. And in, Iman wasn't in either of those scenarios. But what she does describe, that financial stress, it makes sense at an early age to have a core memory like that. It very well might influence adult decisions as it has for her. I know that when I've spoken to other child free people, sometimes it is what those other people assume, that it's childhood trauma. I do think financial stress, that's something that probably a lot of people can relate to. You overhear conversations with your parents, you get a sense of like, okay, we have to really be mindful of how we're spending. That can be very stressful for a child and even a young adult, as she was at the time. And when I think about my own sort of dragging my feet towards having a child, and in my case, there was lots of other factors like the idea of doing this on my own. I had a core memory too from an early age of witnessing just how overwhelming parenting was for my parents, particularly my mom. And so you carry that into adulthood. It really does influence this decision. And so I just wanted to take an extra beat with the idea of those early formed core memories and how that does have an impact on the decisions we make in life. And back to the conversation.
It's funny, I can't think of a moment. It was a slow burn for me because in listening, it really was over time because the natural expectation, like I randomly recently found, I used to keep a list of my future kids' names, Bronwyn and Morley, right? But then, like, thinking about it, I was like, I was just in love with the names. Like, when it came down to it, why I would want to have kids is so I could indoctrinate them in my beliefs, make them super cool, authentic, little inclusive kids, get them into my music, right? Like it was all these really superficial reasons behind, an excuse to throw a party. And then one day I was like, well, you don't. Well, over time, it wasn't one day that I was like, you can get a pet and name it, right? Like there's all you can throw parties for any reason, Mashadi. You don't need to bring have children to so it really was me sort of and I would credit feminism when I found feminism it and this is even when I still wanted kids feminism made me think oh I could do this differently so it didn't turn me off to having to the potential for being married and having kids in fact it helped me be a little bit more interested like oh this can look different feminism showed me that or taught me that and it was only till, and I used to joke when I worked in magazines oh, okay, I'm on the Manhattan mommy track. Because when I was in my 20s, there were older women working on staff who were in their 30s and 40s and just having kids. So, working at Ladies Home Journal magazine and Lifetime magazine and even 17 magazine, that showed me, oh, in Manhattan, in New York City, it's normal to be a mother late. So I still, even then, when I was still thinking I wanted to have kids, get married and have kids, it didn't feel like, oh, because I was surrounded by women who had kids later in life. And probably when I actually began living and working at a boarding school with teenagers, it's a 24/7 job, that I was like, oh, yeah, no, I don't want this. I don't want, no. Because as a teacher living and working at a boarding school, I am functioning in loco parentis, right? So that means I'm dealing with grades, relationships, friendships, college, applying for college, the good stuff that happens, the mental health breakdowns, going to the ER. So I got a taste, right, like of living with teenagers 24/7. And I was like, no, I'm good. Just like Carolyn was like, with the puppy, I'm good. No, thank you. Like, I don't, because I remember thinking like, oh, wait, aside from the fact that some parents can afford to send their kids, outsource their kids for a little while, I was like, oh, this is what parents do? Oh, this is a lot. This is a lot. And kids are expensive. These schools are $70,000. That's high school. I'm not even thinking about like I know that daycare is a racket. It's expensive. That's a cap. It's a captive population. People need daycare. So I was just like, y'all, listen. Much respect to parents, but no, thank you. No, thank you. No, ma'am. No ham. No turkey. The deli is closed. I do not want this for myself. I do not. What I really, it came down to, I do not want children in my life 24/7. There are other things I would like to do with my time, my money, and my energy.
Yeah, and it's interesting that with that feeling that you are at a boarding school with these teenagers, but I agree with you. I mean, for it's an interesting choice, and I know that there are lots of circumstances that lead to that choice of I'm you're gonna I'm gonna send my child to boarding school. It in some ways sounds like a dream, in particular, like with teenage years. But there's so much critical parenting that needs to happen in that time, and I find it interesting that like teachers would have to essentially be the surrogate parent in those scenarios. But yes, I can also imagine if you're dealing with that in bulk with all these teenagers, you'd be like, I'm good. That's enough.
And I ran a dorm, so they are knocking. So I'm teaching kids. I see them at breakfast, lunch, dinner. They're knocking on my door at 2 a.m. This is why I teach at a day school now, though. So they go home to their.
Side note, let's talk about the terms child free and childless. I use the term child free because it accurately describes for me somebody leading a life without children, not tending to them, not being responsible for them. They're just leading their own life. I feel like I've heard childless for a really long time. I think I grew up hearing that term. What I don't like about it is that there's an implication that if you are childless, then you are living a life lacking something. And I just don't agree with that. Life well before Dylan was very, very full, very enjoyable, just like the women in this episode. And so It just makes sense for me to use the term child free. That just sounds right. But I do know that I've gotten a little bit of questions, or not pushback, but like people are like, oh, like kind of surprised when I use that term, because I guess, sugar free, child free. I don't know, it doesn't resonate for them, and that's fine. As we've said in previous episodes, social norms are regional, and everybody's entitled to feel the way that they do. Child free works for me. That's the term we're going to use. And it seems to resonate with today's guest as well as everyone else I know who's living a child free life. So there you go. And back to the conversation. I always say that you have a lifetime to find a partner, you have a window to have a child. So I look at the decision, or just going with the flow of not having a child. That's a permanent situation versus I know that the three of you are currently single, which I look as a temporary situation. So I am wondering how much that temporary status of being single informed this decision, if at all. I mean, it sounds like with Mashadi and a man, you decided very clear early on, no, children are not part of my future. So I'm not sure how much this question relates to either of you. Maybe Caroline, I'm curious how much that was a factor in the decision.
I think it was probably after having the aha moment of knowing I had a choice and then being open, it was 100% the reason. Well, I knew my energy levels and what I wanted to do, that if I were to have a child, I would want to do it with a partner. And I was really clear in my mind around that when I was later in life. And so when that didn't happen, that's when it was just like letting go of, it wasn't even really a letting go. It was just like, I was just continuing on my life and wasn't meeting anyone. And at some point, I think there were some moments of coming to terms with the idea that I wasn't going to have children. I don't know, for me, because I was open to it, I've talked to other women who are also child free, not necessarily because of my circumstances. And there is a bit of a grieving that happens in recognizing that not only did I not do that, but that also affects the rest of my life too, in some ways,
Side note. Ooh, let's talk about grieving. I'm so happy that Caroline brought this up. It is a huge part of so many people's journeys, whether it's not being able to have a biological child, not being able to have a second child, having children, and grieving one's previous life, child-free life. But the version of grieving that Caroline is referring to is definitely one that deserves some airtime. I've known several women who have experienced this type of grief. I think a way in which we all can universally relate is we all have dreams. We all have visions of how life is going to go. And if you pretty much talk to anyone over the age of 35, men or women, probably going to tell you that certain things about their life aren't looking the way that they envisioned it early on. It doesn't mean that they aren't loving the life that they have. Sometimes certain things that we wanted in life don't happen when we wanted them to happen. I know in my own experience, I can say, of course, I had in my mind's eye at 8 years old exactly the traditional nuclear structure that this podcast is sort of challenging, which is husband, wife, children. And I just wanted to give an extra beat to what she's talking about, especially because I know a lot of women may have seen children in their future. Perhaps they are overwhelmed by the idea of having a child on their own. It's overwhelming to have a child, period. It's extra overwhelming to do it on your own. I can speak from experience on that. What I have seen modeled for me are women who take the time to feel what they feel, and then they move into a new chapter where there's more acceptance. Perhaps the grieving comes and goes throughout life. And I wish everyone who is going through that path all the support they need to get through it. And back to the conversation.
Because there were a lot of different reasons that people had children, even before our generation. It was to have the support of those kids. They were working, for the family in the fields and doing things. So now we can't really expect that we're going to have our children, people who have kids, that they're going to be around as we get older. And so I'm digressing, I guess, in the
Not
conversation.
really, no. I mean, it's all part of it.
But yeah, I mean, I guess just to say that there was an internal process that happened as I was sort of letting go of that idea of having kids. And it was a reconciliation of the past, and also having to reconcile like what my future would be.
Well, I can say as someone who is a solo parent, I can't say enough how important it is to have another person involved. It is as much as everyone says it is. It's a lot. When I've talked to women who are even contemplating doing this on their own, I was like, hopefully you have one of two things, if not both, that would be ideal, which is, are you independently wealthy, or do you live across the street from a family who really wants to be involved in raising your children, and you all get along? Most people say, I don't have either. I don't have either. And I think that would make a huge difference in this experience, because I do hear from a lot of partnered parents, particularly moms, who say like, "Oh, I'm doing everything," and I do know that.
I said that part because listen, marriage is not a guarantee. I totally hear what you're saying. Like another body that cares is important, but also the number of times you see married couples and who ends up sort of.
I mean, it's well documented, well documented that it's very skewed. For me, I was hoping that there was going to be a partner in the picture. I went ahead and had the child without the partner, but going back to what I was originally saying, I feel like that's a temporary circumstance of partner, and that's when the decisions get a little harder to figure out, am I going to take this step? But Mashadi and Iman, any influence on your decision, the fact that at the time you were single, or was it just super resolute for you, like, don't want them?
I would say since I made, when I was thinking about this, since I kind of made that decision over 30 years ago, I would say I was super resolute. I remember a couple of years ago going to Mexico City and visiting one of the latter home that Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo shared, and they each had a separate house that was connected by a bridge. And I remember saying, "That's the only way that I'll ever live with someone."
I come from a people who would not approve of single parenting by choice. Um, and my parents did make that clear, um, that there was not going to be any teen pregnancy. There was not going to be any, like, you're not having children until, unless you have an education and a job. Like, some things need to be in place. So they definitely made it clear what was acceptable and what was not. So even though my burgeoning feminism was like, all right, I get why they are like that, but it still held deep in me that even with the money, um, I could have totally, if I wanted kids, done it. Could have chosen to do it solo. I have friends. I have a friend who's a doctor, who chose to do it solo, African American, and her mama was like, "Girl, what?" Um, I mean, mama's past it now, but it just, for Black women in particular, I feel like if you come from a certain kind of background and family, that even if you are a capable, educated woman, like, I can't imagine a man's family being like, "Yeah, do it." Like, I feel
Very
like your
similar to
parents are like,
Mashadi,
"Oh,
yeah.
that's not, mm-mm." So even if my feminism had said, "I'm gonna do this anyway," it still would have been, I would not have done it in the end, because it would have just been too much to cultural baggage around that. And even when you are quote unquote an educated, whatever, Black woman, solo parenting, the stereotypes, and that's not a reason not to do something, but I'm just really grateful that in the end it was other things that made it so that I didn't want kids. And now I had a history, so I can't have kids.
Side note, there is so much here in what Mashadi just shared I will start with what she just said, that she had a hysterectomy. For anyone who's unfamiliar with what that is when a woman's uterus is removed from her body. And a variety of medical reasons lead to that procedure. It is very common. And while it's common, it's still a big deal. It's a big deal physically, it's a big deal emotionally. So I wanted to just honor Mashadi and all the other women who have had hysterectomies for going through such a significant experience. I also want to address the cultural baggage and stereotypes that Mashadi just referenced. Not too long ago, I heard a Black woman speak about the cultural baggage, the stereotypes that Mashadi is describing as they relate to solo parenthood. She made a comparison. The point she was making was that society perceives Black women in a judgmental way for being a solo parent, but that the opposite was true for white women. White women are perceived as brave for being solo parents. I'm going to point out the obvious here, that we're looking at two women doing exactly the same thing, being perceived completely differently because of the color of their skin. It's no wonder that the cultural baggage that Mashadi describes would be a result of this unfair perception from society in the form of judgment for being a solo parent. And back to the conversation.
I would say similarly, my parents are both, devout in their own way with regards to religion. I am not. But also there was stigmas attached. I was born in 1974, and I think maybe our generation, Caroline, you're a little younger, but I would say our generation, we were probably the last generation where these sort of heavy, steeped expectations were set for daughters in particular. And that's why to an extent, I'm very envious of these younger women who have chosen, they have agency and they're living their life. Because when I was growing up, if you were a single mother, if you had a child out of wedlock,
Hmm.
it was out of wedlock, right?
Yep.
That's the term that was used, out of wedlock, between quotes. And so that was a mark of, you being loose, you're a failure, you didn't come from a decent home, you came from a broken home, so you're repeating this cycle. So perhaps subconsciously, I realized, well, I'm not going to do that. And so I'm not going to have children.
Yeah, I can imagine that's quite a load to carry into the thought process of this, for sure.
Because these expectations are not placed on boys, right? Or our male counterparts. I mean, I remember my parents having sort of conversations with me as their daughter and not having those same conversations with my brother who's 3 years my senior. And I would sometimes challenge them on that. Well, you never said that to my brother. And that it would be my response or my question would be met with silence. So that also informed me a lot about decisions and decisions that I would make either consciously or subconsciously.
Absolutely. Yeah, the gender thing, I remember being told that my curfew was what it was because they didn't want me to get pregnant. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize you could only get pregnant after that time.
Well,
But
that saying, right? That only what is it? It's a like after midnight or something. The only things open are 7-Eleven and like women's legs or something. I didn't say it right, but like
I've heard nothing good happens after midnight, but I hadn't heard. But that's a new spin on it. I haven't heard that one. But that's a great segue, actually. So, how have people in your life, friends and family, how have they responded to your child-free path?
Like I said before, my father was an only child, so any kind of pressure would not. I don't have uncles or cousins or aunts on my father's side that would have applied in that kind of pressure. But that kind of pressure, I would say, came mostly from my relatives in Egypt or my Egyptian friends. And I remember a couple of years ago, literally like 3-4 years ago, when I was vacationing in Cairo, I went out with two groups of friends. They're two couples. They're two married couples, and they each have two children. And they were talking about the burdens of being parents, and I'm sitting there drinking my chai latte, like I don't have this problem. And school's expensive, and I'm just listening, listening to them talk, and you know how conversations evolve. And I responded to a question, and I said, well, motherhood was really never for me. And one of my friends, one of the mothers said, well, how do you know unless you have children? And I said, well, I remember when I was 6, I had a crush on this teacher. So I knew that. So similarly, I knew at a relatively young age that I didn't want to have children. And she started, I wouldn't say that she started to berate me, but she started to question me. And she took great offense to what I said because she, in particular, struggled to have her son. It took her a few years to conceive her son. So the fact that I callously or casually said that I never wanted to have children was offensive to her. And so, sort of to change the subject, I said, well, I must have been in my early 40s. Maybe I was in my early 40s. I said, well, if I ever change my mind, I could always adopt. There are plenty of unwanted and children who are not living with their parents or families to whom I could extend this great love. And she, her reaction changed, and she said, you could never love a child that you adopt the same way that you could love a child that you birth. And I was shocked by that reaction, but it was also telling because in Egypt and in Islam in particular, that's the religion that I was raised in, adoption is not common. And so even if you do adopt a child, you don't give this adopted child your surname, right? So if I were living in Egypt as a Muslim and I were to adopt, I don't give that child my name. So there's always going to be this separation that this child is not Abdul Fattah, does not belong to, it's not a part of the Abdul Fattah clan. So that fact um, sort of renders a distinction, I think. And so for her, adopting could never be the same as birthing a child, if that's the proper term. And we got into a little argument or a debate about that, but then I suddenly had to change the conversation because I think her grievance was the byproduct of struggling to have a child. And so she couldn't conceive of a person or imagine another woman not wanting to have a child. It was perceived as me being selfish or maybe selfless. I don't know. But I received a lot of comments like that. I remember too, one of my younger cousins, who's now twice divorced, when she first got engaged, she, forgetting that English is my native language, was introducing her relatives to her fiance. And she whispers to her fiance in English, this is my 28-year-old cousin. She's never been married and she doesn't have kids. And that was the introduction. That was my introduction to her fiance. Not that I'm independent and intelligent. No, no, no. Her introduction to her fiance was, this is my 28-year-old cousin. She's never been married and she doesn't have children.
Wow. I'm just thinking like 12 other ways to introduce you that are accurate and far more relevant and interesting than those. That is amazing. Not that surprising though. I feel like regionally, and I could almost say this internationally, I just feel like in so many parts of this world, if there's one thing there's that they have in common is this like really strong opinion around what women should be doing. And that is phenomenal. And I have to say, I mean, I'm not that surprised, and at the same time, I'm shocked. I don't know. Mashadi, what about you? How have your family and friends responded to your feelings about having children?
I don't know. I think some people in my family probably just think I'm weird, polite not to question, even though I do have nosy family who will comment on other things about people. But no one has really been like, well, how come you aren't married? How come you don't, which I'm grateful for, although I really do think they probably ponder and wonder. And friends, I feel like I don't know how, but I have gathered together a really good mix of, married friends with children, child free, child free friends, single, and married friends with no kids who are also child free. The only thing we've had to navigate though is when previously child free people had kids. Like that I've had more sort of, okay, what is this friendship going to look like now, honestly? And sometimes I pulled back and they were upset about that, because I made some presumptions that I should not have made. So now I have learned that when friends who are married and eventually have kids, to talk to them like, okay, now what is this going to look like for us now, and not be just like disappear on them. Because I was like, oh, okay, now you got kids, you're not gonna have time. You're this, you're that. Let me just remove myself from the equation, and I actually have pushback.
I can only speak to being, a solo parent, but I'll tell you, those friendships matter so much more to me after having the child. Like you really, again, I'll speak for myself. They're very important. If I had a friend who was backing off, I'd be very upset because like, no, I need you more than ever. And just to have fun, like, let me go hang out with you, and I'll get a babysitter, and let me just laugh with you, and
Like
yeah.
I'm the friend who'll come over and like, yeah, get up, and if you need to go handle something, go ahead. If you want me to come over and just sit with them while you do something else, you take a nap, like I'll do that. But it took me having that kind of static in one particular friendship to learn what you're saying. Don't disappear. Like this, like it was like a friendship moment, having to talk about expectations and what we would like to see happen for each other in terms of actually wanting to maintain this relationship.
Sure. Yeah. I hear this quite a bit from partnered moms who are just sort of any opportunity to hang out with friends just because they're feeling maybe more seen. I don't know. That's been my experience anyway. Caroline, what about you? Family and friends responding to you being child free?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I guess really it was earlier on when I was in my maybe 20s and 30s that I would go back to Michigan, and the first question would be, "Are you dating anyone?" Like, because as we talked about, that came first, right? So no one was going to ask me about kids if I didn't have a partner. Probably if I'd been partnered, I would have been getting we, this hypothetical other, we would have been getting that question a lot, and I'm sure probably a lot of you know, married or partnered couples who don't have children have that happening all the time. When are you going to have kids? When are you going to have kids? So it wasn't for me as much as when are you going to have kids? It was, are you dating anyone? Do you have a boyfriend? And then after probably 10 years of me saying no, or just not really being interested in answering that question, because there's more to my life than that. I think people just stopped asking. I think it's just I was sort of rolling with the punches, and my family was sort of rolling with the punches, and and I also just go back to Michigan, and I see how a lot of these relationships have unfolded, early marriages, and honestly, there's a part of me that's like, oh gosh, the fact that I didn't wait. I wasn't waiting, but the fact that I haven't yet I'm not yet partnered with someone, which is something I would like eventually. I feel like doing it later in life for me is actually going to be a really good thing if that happens, because I've had so much life experience. I've been able to do so many things in my life, being single and also not having children. That has made my life so rich that I wouldn't have had if I had made or come across someone and married them and had children. So when I look back at the choices I made and who I am as a person, and I look at where I'm now, because I was thinking about this podcast and some of your questions, it actually made me emotional that my life right now is absolutely perfect.
As a friend of yours and as an observer of your life, I can absolutely 100% endorse that statement. Absolutely. And yeah, I think it would look very different. It would look very different if either you had children, unpartnered, partnered. It would look different. I saw something on social media recently that I think is so funny. It's like people kept telling me that once you have kids that you won't be doing all the things that you love. We do everything we used to do. It's just now ruined. I went traveling with my daughter and it was not ruined. But I do understand the sentiment behind that is it's different. It's different for sure.
And I just want to say, like, my life is perfect. It's perfect for me, considering who I am and the things that I love in my life. And I also just will say, I think I've always had an alternative mindset around marriage, partnership, and family, because at a very young age, I was traveling the world and leaving my family at 19 to live in a foreign country and spending, a couple years living in Europe and backpacking and doing all these things. And I got to see these alternative family structures where people were backpacking with their toddlers for 2 years, or in San Francisco where people were unmarried and happened to have a child. And so I saw all these different ways. And I think I was like taking notice and seeing all these different alternative ways. And I'm actually still learning, even in terms of like romantic partnerships. Like, is that like, do I want to get married? Is that really what I wanted? I mean, even at 48, I'm still questioning what other alternatives are there besides the structure that we have grown up with thinking is the right thing to do. So I think as long as, for me, as long as I'm still questioning and wondering and having curiosity, like anything's possible, really. So
what about you, Mashadi? Which misconception irks you the most?
This notion that compulsory motherhood and this idea that women must be mothers, must, have to, should, and that if you do not, there's clearly something wrong with you. There's something, you're broken, right? And especially for me as a Black woman, like I like to joke that I think child-free Black women are the freest Black women in Black history. Especially when you consider the ways in which Black women's reproductive labor. Historically, in the land we now call the United States of America, compulsory motherhood was, a critical, is what made us valuable under that system, in that we were forced. First of all, motherhood was just fraught overall because there was that forced angle, definitely compulsory because we were considered property, and the more children we were forced to have, the more we created wealth for the people who believed that they owned us. So for me as a Black feminist, I'm very in tune with and attentive to the ways to how Black women have historically had to reproduce. Um, and so this is why I say then child-free Black women are the freest Black women in Black history, because we have, in the United States, or what we've called the United States, we have engaged forced reproductive labor than, 200 plus years of enslavement versus what, 100 plus of freedom, right? So there's that angle for me that as a Black feminist, to me, it is, I feel like my ancestors would honor, just as much as I know that there are Black women who feel like it is important for Black women to have babies. I feel like my ancestors, there are some who would be like, right on, little sister, that because it's a choice. Nobody's forcing me. I'm lucky enough to be born in an era that, despite social cultural socialization, it still ultimately is my choice. And to me, it is a high value, high target choice that has opened up my life in really amazing ways. But also compulsory, like, why would people want me to be a mother if I don't want to be a mother? It's like, why would you want to jump me into that game for me to be miserable or unhappy or just to not be interested? Because I don't find motherhood compelling or interesting. There were other things I would like to do in my life. I'm not interested in in giving what it requires somebody to give. I'm not interested in doing what it requires me to do. I don't want children in my house 24/7. I want to do what I want with my time, my money, and my energy. So the idea then of like trying to still, people still like to push compulsory motherhood. They don't call it that, but there's plenty of ways to shame women and to even bully women into having babies. I know we all know women who, after birth, I don't mean just like postpartum, like these are people who want to have kids, but they're going. I mean, like you can find the Reddits of people who were like, "Yeah, I should not have done this." People have, and also the other thing I try to remind people about compulsory motherhood: a lot of people are having children for janky reasons. So people want to get mad at me for critiquing compulsory motherhood, but if you really start asking people, why did you actually have a child? Some janky reasons to keep a man, to keep a woman, to this, to that. It is not legitimate reasons. So at least I like to say I've thought deeply and long about this decision. A lot of people I feel like have kids just because they can. It was an accident. So when people try to come for me, like, or just have something to say in general about child-free people, I say, oh no, let's flip it around, because a lot of y'all out here with children did not think twice about it. You just brought kids into the world, so let's talk about that.
I would say having a child to keep a relationship alive is perhaps the worst reason to have a child. And also, I want to acknowledge what an incredible point you made when you think about the reasons why people choose to remain child free. The word freedom comes up a lot, freedom of time, freedom of energy. But you're hitting on something so much bigger than that, just the freedom to make that choice and to be liberated of a role that has historically been so connected to Black women, especially if you're experiencing a lot of pushback or critique around that. I just applaud your courage in just standing your ground and saying, nope, this is what I want. And that is the ultimate freedom. I think that's incredible.
Well, the one misconception that I think irritates me the most is that this assumption that my time is less valuable and important. And I would say that I've been I guess, the butt of that kind of a misconception many times. My brother, for example, my brother lives in Long Island, which is it's not far. It's a suburb of New York, but I see him once a season, literally. I think the last time I saw him was the week before Christmas. And that's largely because, there are multiple factors, but whatever we do, we're always trying to plan when we could meet. And it's usually me going out there because he has a car and a family and it's expensive. And he'll often say things like, well, you don't have a family, so you don't know what it's like. And my answer is yes, I don't have a family and I don't want to know what it's like, right? I don't want to know. Or, he'll say things to me like, this is something that I resent, actually. I mean, and it's not that I'm lacking in empathy for people who choose to have families. I don't. That's your choice. You chose to make that choice. It is your responsibility. You have to own up to it, like anything. You have to make your bed, you have to take a shower, you got to take care of your kid. I also don't like it when people sort of expect that I'll be sort of a second mother, um, or a surrogate aunt. And maybe I don't want that either. I've had this kind of conversation with my brother, especially when it comes to sort of, it's also finances. It's not just about your time. You have money, right? So, my brother for a long time, whenever it was his son's birthday or graduation or something, uh, will you contribute? And I had to once say to my brother, if I wanted the responsibility of another generation, then I would have had children myself. Just because you chose to have a child does not mean you should not expect me to contribute financially or otherwise to his upbringing. That is, I mean, you're stripping me of the agency that I choose to give myself. So I think added to that is not only is my time less valuable and important, but also, you why can't you contribute? towards my son's vacation or towards my son's birthday. This is an expectation. Also, when it comes time to planning an outing with friends who by this age, I'm 50, have children, and some of my friends have children who are in college, some of my friends have children who are in high school. It's sort of like my schedule has to revolve around theirs. Well, I'm sorry. I take yoga on Monday evening and Thursday evening, and nothing, with minor exceptions, interferes with that. That is a choice that I made, and I shouldn't be expected to alter my routine. However, you perceive my routine to be, it is a routine that I chose for myself to feel fulfilled. It is important to me, and I deeply, deeply resent it when people suggest that I should alter my routine and my schedule to accommodate theirs. Because you're setting a dangerous precedent that, there is this hierarchy, and at the top are, you know, uh, two parent household with children, and then single parent household with children, and then the rest of us are sort of like the rubbish insignificant class, and we're expected to cater and uphold the whims of these other two stratas in the hierarchy.
I was in a Black child free organization online once, and that, because I'm an only child, so I don't have siblings who for whom that might emerge as something, but for other, in particular, the women who had siblings, the way they would write posts about, like just other siblings who were not doing as well as they were and who had kids, assuming that because they were the sibling that had made the most money and did not, and as the man said, did not have kids, like those two go hand in hand. You got money to burn. So we're trying to put them in camp. What are you giving? We think we have decided, like people coming together and saying, we decided that you should be the one who should buy the bike or should pay for this. Like, like the entitlement. I did not know some people have siblings who were just like, yeah, you're child free. You have money. Of course. Why wouldn't you want to do for your nieces and nephews on this level? And when sometimes they would help, like, if they got janky parents, if, some of these people were like, I have a janky brother, I want to see this my niece do well, so I'm gonna and then others were like, I'm done. We're not, no, don't ask me for nothing else. So I had no idea that that was, another thing that child free people had to negotiate.
I think it's wise to set boundaries, as it sounds like you are, Iman. And you're reminding me of something, which is one of the things that has always triggered me when I was child free. And it still triggers me, actually. Whenever you hear that there's been a tragic accident, the first question most people ask when an adult has tragically died, did they have kids? As if I say yes, now that in that person's mind the value of that life, or it's more tragic if the person, and it's, of course it's sad no matter what, but I've always gotten a little triggered when I've heard that, especially because I'll hear that, maybe from my mom, be like, did they have kids? And it's like, I'm not even sure I want to answer that question. It's just, this life is valuable on its own, and it's a huge tragedy that we've lost this person. It doesn't, whether or not they have children doesn't make the value of this person higher or lower. And I would say that that's one that really bugs me.
If you don't have children, you're idle.
And you'll be missed less.
Yeah. So that's mine. Caroline, what's yours?
Well, in terms of assumptions, I guess that our capacity for loving is not the same as a woman who has children. And this just came to mind for me because a lot of people have heard this phrase, you don't know true love until you've had a child, or something like that. And I know that's often used to maybe say to a pregnant woman, you are about to embark on the most beautiful journey of your lifetime, or a woman has just had a baby and might be struggling. It's like, well, but just wait. This, the most beautiful love that you've ever experienced is yet to come. And I was in a situation where someone had said that, and to a group of people, and in the moment, something didn't quite sit right with me, but it took me a couple of days of really contemplating it to be like, why does this not feel right? And I think the question that I have now with that statement is that true? Like, can we ask ourselves, is that true? Because as someone who doesn't have children and loves children, I love being around kids. I love being around my friends' children. I love my friends deeply. I love my dog deeply. I have a lot of really loving relationships in my life, and I feel that each love is different, and I don't know that one is better or more profound or more deep than another. I know that parenthood comes with a deep nurturing and protection and attachment. But we also can experience those things in romantic partnerships, in friendships. And as I see like my mom and her friends getting older, what I'm seeing is that it's her friendships that are the relationships that have often outlasted many other relationships, because children have left, they've moved to other states or to other countries, maybe their spouse has passed or they're divorced. And the thing that has held true and strong in their lives, particularly with women, because I think we're really good at friendships, compared to men who maybe take a little bit of a back seat in terms of making efforts in their relationships. I think this has also been scientifically proven that women are just naturally nurturing their relationships with one another more. And I think that's really what I aspire to now in my life. And also when I think about my future, like that kind of loving is also really special. So I just think of all the different types of love, all the different types of relationship, love for our planet. We can have a spiritual experience of love. We can have an experience of loving for ourselves. We can have an experience of loving for other people's children. And not to say that this is what other people should do, but one of the most profound experiences of loving that I have had is by not having children. I've had the opportunity to work with underserved children in Peru and also here in San Francisco. And I love using my time in that way to be in the experience of loving with others that aren't even necessarily part of my family. So I just go back to the question, is it true? And I think, Nicole, in a previous conversation, that also can be very triggering for women who do have children.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think everyone in whatever path they take in life is going to have a unique experience. For the number of humans that are on this planet, that's the number of unique experiences in life, right? And so I feel like that's such a stereotypical thing to hear people say. We've all heard people say that. And it particularly like, oh, the moment this child was born, everything turned into Technicolor, everything. Like those, I almost think that that can be really dangerous. And I love that people are being more honest about this, because more and more women are being open about their experience with postpartum depression. Bonding doesn't always happen immediately. There's a lot of reasons why that happens. So I feel like it's not a supportive statement. And I'm talking from the mom side, because I experienced my own postpartum depression. And when you hear those things, you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm not doing this right. I'm not having the right experience. And to your point, Caroline, having a child, I can tell you how deep my love is for so many people in my life. Of course you have a huge love for your child. All the different loves that you can have are unique in and of itself, and I wouldn't necessarily rate them, you know. So to your point, I really feel like deep love and connection is whatever it is for that person.
If you're never going to experience the love that, until you've had a child, it discounts everything that's happened up until that point in your life as a woman before motherhood. Again, it's putting the emphasis on, the importance of women with children, that this is the highest thing that you could achieve.
I feel like Gen Z is going to right size this all for us. So much is being written about this topic and how younger generations are like, I don't know, it doesn't look that fun. It looks really expensive. I don't want to have that big of a carbon footprint. There are lots of perceptions mocked on social media, but I bet there's a lot of parents that are like, in reaction to that. So, something else you said, Caroline, that I would really like to address is chosen family, or what I call friend family. And as you pointed out, friendships oftentimes outlive partnerships, marriages. Your kids grow up, they move away, whether it's to school or something else, and then you have your friendships. And I actually feel like my life has been hugely enriched by friend family. In fact, when I moved to the West Coast, it was the first time ever that I was spending Thanksgiving with friends as opposed to family, and I have to say I loved it. I mean, I love my time with my family, but it was also like, oh, this is also really incredible. And just the support system that can exist for a lifetime with friends is hugely valuable to me. So I'm curious, for each of you, what role has chosen family played in your lives?
I'll try to answer it like this. A couple of years ago, I decided to have a lawyer help me draft a living will and a healthcare proxy. And that stemmed from the fact that my mom and I were watching one of our favorite British crime thrillers. I don't remember which one, but the mother in the series was visiting her comatose daughter. And I said something like, if that were ever to happen to me, just pull the plug. And my mom said, no, I'm going to come visit you. So as a result, I went to my union lawyer. I said, listen, you need to help me attend to this. And as I was preparing this living will and healthcare proxy, I also put together a list of, like, if I'm ever in a desperate situation, a list of people that I would feel comfortable contacting. Like if I'm ever on the brink of homelessness, if I'm ever out of my father's deceased, I have a brother, I'm estranged from my sister. So it's really the only family that I have in New York is my mom. But I have my family of friends. And I put together a list of people, like if I'm ever in a desperate, desperate situation that requires me to reach out to people for help, I have that list. And I think that's important because I don't want to resort to homelessness or anything like that. But also, when it comes to things like I have different groups of people whose counsel I seek. I recently resigned from my job, and the same group of people. I'm like, what do I do? What do I tell my supervisor? How should I handle this? And even if those of us who choose not to have a family, that doesn't mean we don't need help or we don't need to echo thoughts off of people. And it's great to have this network of friends, of people that you've met at different phases and different stages in your life, from whom you could seek counsel and help, and advice and shelter and support and assistance, but to also, it's important to reciprocate that and to understand and recognize that even your friends who have their own nuclear family, sometimes they need an ear and they need support, even though they have, there's bed pillow or whatever that expression is, pillow talk, and they also need someone aside from their partner and their children and their spouse, to bounce ideas off of. So I have my little group chats with certain people, and they're pinned at the top of my WhatsApp, and text group, and we, on a daily, a regular basis, we are in touch. And when I don't hear from Mashadi, I send her a message, and how are you doing? You haven't sent me one of your silly jokes. Or I think it's important to have that. It's important to know that even by virtue of distance, or due to distance, that there's a network of a group of people that you are in constant touch with, who are your confidants, and whose support you can receive and give on a regular basis. And I love having that. I really do.
Mashadi.
Everything a man said, um, in particular being child free. And even though I think I would like to be married or partner, um, there's no guarantee that that will happen. And so, nonetheless, I do recognize it is important for me to ensure that my money situation will be able to take care of me when I become an elder, right? So I can stay at a dope nursing home, like where it's active and like it's not like one of those scary nursing homes. Like this is a high end nursing home where I will be well cared for. And also, thinking about like dying with dignity and like, so trying to get clear on the things that I will need. Um, and I do have family, right? Like who also will come through for me, but I'm also not looking to rely on the generation of my cousins behind me to be the ones to, like I did have spinster aunts, right? But I'm not looking to, to be the spinster aunt, right? Like, oh, the kid's gonna have to. No, I'm not relying on any of that. I have to rely on my job and saving money to take care of that. They want to come visit. That's great. But so there are things I know I need to put into place for end of life, but also as Iman pointed out, like nurturing um, really good friendships, even across distance, because people will come through for you in all kinds of ways. If I need to go to New York, I can stay with Iman. If she comes to Atlanta, she can stay with me.
And both have happened.
Yes, yes. So, and like, I hope I'm on that list so that if Iman ever, like, and these are people who there's no shame, right? Like, this chosen family, there's not an issue of shame. We might say, I might say something real wild to Iman and she may have to tell me about myself, right? Like, honest relationships. And we're not going to get offended, right? Like, because you got to have people who can tell you, I don't, okay, now if you do this, I'm just going to let you know, I don't really understand how this is going to help you. When whatever happens, I will be there for you.
That's the unconditional love and the freedom to check each other, which I think is also because I didn't grow up with sisters, but I consider my girlfriends sisters, and I definitely have relationships. Going back to what you were saying, Caroline, I feel like my friendships, particularly with women, my close inner circle, they feel like sisters. It definitely transcends friendship. So yeah, going back to the deep love. And what about you, Caroline, chosen family?
Well, you actually just said something that I hadn't really thought about or considered, this idea of unconditional loving. And personally, I don't feel that I grew up in an environment of unconditional love. It was very conditional. So to be able to say, and I'm sure that I'm not to say that there wasn't, that was just my experience for the most part. But now when I think about my friendships, it is really around unconditional loving. And so it's unique in that way. And, there are a lot of us who may have challenges with their families, and we choose to still be in relationship with them. And maybe sometimes we don't, but sometimes we have to bite the bullet in family situations, right? And show up in the best way that we can, even despite the challenges. And we might not be in relationship with those people if they weren't in our family, but our friendships we choose, and we choose those every single day. And I think that is really beautiful. It speaks volumes to why we're in the friendships that we're in, who we're in these relationships with, and what we get out of them, and what we're able to give So, the reciprocity. Um, and I also had a moment similar to Iman, where I was filling out, going through like a will and a trust. And it was an aha moment for me, where, if you are single and child free and there's a form that asks for an emergency contact, there's always a moment where it's like, who do I put? And so to really like have those structures in place where we know that we're held and supported in our circles of friends, um, offers a lot of peace of mind. And I think the last thing I just want to say is there should be something in place where we get to celebrate these relationships,
Oh, yeah.
because we have weddings
Right.
for partnerships. We have baby showers when babies come in. We have engagement parties. We have all these things, but what do we have to celebrate our friendships? If someone, God forbid, ends up in the hospital, who's your spouse? Okay, only your spouse can be in the room with you, or someone in your nuclear family. And so friendships are kind of tossed off to the side as if they're not really as important as a partnership or as a nuclear family. But I think it's time to start questioning that, because in my mind, oftentimes, if I'm going through something really challenging, the person or people that I want around me are my friends. So I just think there's a lot of opportunities that we can take to celebrate those relationships outwardly, um, and to just be an example in our lives as women who are at this moment single and child free, to show other women how beautiful and important these relationships are, and that other relationships don't necessarily trump friendships. But there's an enduring, beautiful, loving quality to those.
You're giving me ideas, Caroline, for the party. um, so I wanted to wrap this up with one question. I would just say, with one word from each of you. Uh, we didn't dig into just how fabulous each of your lives are, but I happen to know from previous conversations. And I am curious to hear, what would you say is the biggest advantage you feel you experience from being child free? We've touched on this quite a bit throughout the conversation, but what would you say in a word, like what your biggest advantage is?
The freedom to be spontaneous.
Oh, spontaneity. God, yes. RIP in my case, but yes, that's amazing. Caroline?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is sleep. Um,
Another
because
one.
I really cherish my sleep. But yeah, I think, yeah, yeah, freedom to be able to make spontaneous decisions around what I want to do on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, I have parameters with jobs and things like that, but yeah, I will say I really enjoy the freedom, and also the time and space that I have to give my energy to the things that are really important to me.
Uh, for for Iman and Mashadi, Caroline is quite a Renaissance woman. We didn't go into all of that, but she has so many incredible interests and talents, and yeah, I'm glad that those are coming to full expression because she has the energy and the time to put into them. So just Mashadi.
I'll use a word that encapsulates everybody: sovereignty. So whether that means you can be spontaneous, you can get sleep when you want, or you can have the diet of a toddler's grab bag, birthday party grab bag, or sovereignty is that, yes, I will do this if I want to.
Yeah, I do not underestimate everything that you just said. All the things. So, Iman, Mashadi, Caroline, thank you so much. I think this was a really important conversation. I think it's necessary to celebrate being child free. It is a beautiful life path, and I love that we got an opportunity to talk about the advantages, the misconceptions, and just the space to decide. I think those are all incredibly valuable. So just thank you all for coming and sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
Nicole.
Thank you, Nicole.
Also, if you're part of a unique family and you want to have a conversation with me, please, please, please reach out. Doingthisdifferently.com. Happy to chat with you. I think it's really important, as I've had these conversations with all these different families, normalizing that what makes your family unique is really helpful. It also helps children learn about inclusion and opens their minds as well as their parents, and gives everybody a shared language and understanding of what it means to be a unique family. Thank you again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.